So, oh, what air you doing with your life? Ha 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 ha. I actually just finished working as the did on a feature-length film. And what is that? Oh, so DIT is the digital information technologist. It's basically the person who takes all of the footage that the camera shoots and backs it up, creates redundancy, and gets it off to editing. And where did you learn to do these things, Dano? So, by and large, I learned how to do these things at film school. Really? You've sort of film school. A question that I get asked all the time on Twitter. That I all this the time on me too, yes. Is should I go to film school? Maybe. May. I like saying, should I take this job? Or should I go out with this guy? Like I don't know. It depends on I on I no on it depends. I would say one of the big things that really should factor into whether or not you want to go to film school is you've got to look at what film school actually means. So, in me case, so we both went to film school, but we to so we but well, both and then I went to too. But we had vastly different experiences in regard to that, because there's university level film school, and then there's also technical colleges, like a vocational school. Yeah. So I went to a technical college for film school. So it was a 2-year diploma program, very tech and how to get a job focused. So Selden Alberta Institute of Technology was where I went. And they were very much focused on, like, okay, getting a job in film in Alberta or Vancouver or Saskatchewan. What was the cost for your education? About $2,000 to $2,500 per semester. So, 4 semesters. So, a little under $10,000 for tuition. USC does not offer aid for their grad students, at least in the first year. Or at least they didn't in 2009. Maybe that's changed. It was about $1,400 per credit hour. There was 6 to 10 credit hours per semester. I completed 40 credit hours. Then there was, like, the fees and the insurance. Yeah, and you were going to have all of the other stuff. So that's just your cost for the course registrations. Then there was the cost of the films itself, which of course you have to pay for. I had finished 2.5 years of the coursework, and I had $60,000 in debt. And I had paid in another $45,000-ish. I was one of the lucky ones. I knew people who left with $200,000 plus in debt. I mean, and on top of that, particularly with the way that debt accumulates, that you're going to be paying off interest before you even touching the principal. Yes, I left with $60,000. I have paid into it about $19,000. I now have $69,000. Yeah. My undergrad was at New. I don't know if I would call that a film school because it was film studies, which is the way I described it back then. Was it's like an English degree, only instead of studying books, you study movies. It's much more about film history, criticism, academia, theory. I decided to go into production, which is completely different. The only time when I was an undergrad, the production people and the studies people's paths crossed was in this intro course. The production people were like, why do we need to know interpretive stuff? This is stupid. Let's just go out and run around with our camera. It's just sort of like, oh, the things it could tell them. The problems when tech people don't understand the interpretive and just create stuff and you like, why did people get that meaning from it? I also feel like for that reason, there's a massive disparity between grad and undergrad, and we can't talk about that. I decided very snootily. I was like, well, I'm not going to go to film school if I can't go to the very best one. There's three very best ones. New, Aphi, and us. Ucla would say they re in there. They re not. I applied to two. I got into one, and that was us. I went to Aphi and Ucla. I didn't bother applying to those. It was also very focused on industry stuff and getting a job, but I think the only way to describe it is like a conservatory. It was like a 3-year boot camp, and there is nothing else. There are no other classes that you take except for the business classes. It's completely intensive and also really intense. I think the main difference between us and other film schools is no one really had a film background or not a very substantive one. They didn't want people that did film in undergrad. Sait was just kind of general. A lot of people were coming into it straight out of high school. Some people were switching careers. Of course, it's a lot more local because it is smaller, especially in terms of total industry output. Calgary is a film city, but we like a fifth-tier film city, if we honest about it. A big consideration in whether or not to go to film school is what school you going to and how much is it going to cost you and what do you intend to get out of it. Whenever people say, should I go to film school, I feel like there is a massive divide between do you want to go to a top film school and do you want to go to a vocational school. While, for instance, the debt is insane, I went to school with a lot of people who are already working in the industry in a way that I don't think you see in other film schools. I went to school with a guy who directed Creed and is directing Black Panther. I worked on his student films. The editor for Black Panther was the editor for my thesis. I also went to school with Mara Minen, who did Equity recently. These are just directors and big-name people. I knew people who worked on the Mindy project. The thing about us is if you want to work on big-name things and really be a star. Yeah, if you want to work on big-name things above the line. I've got tons of friends who have worked on big-name things. I've got tons of friends who have worked on big-name things. Tons of friends who worked on The Revenant, who worked on Intergalactic. Someone's got to go door to door with checks being like, business, we're going to be shooting here. Here's your money for the day in case your business ends up in the background of our movie. Whenever you have your way to a top film school, it's basically just a huge leg up. It's not a guarantee for anything. There are people that didn't to go to film school that are also huge stars. Tarantino didn't, right? No. Then there are all the other ones. Bryan Singer went to Gus. Robert Zemeckis. George Lucas. Steven Spielberg you didn't, but he's got an office there. I don't know. I think the other thing is, at least in my experience, I know this feels like an apologia for horrible student debt and yield. Let's so'll go to the University of Spoiled Children. I honestly do feel like for the level of immersion I got, in the amount of time that I did, I feel like their approach where you are not allowed to take a specialized anything until you do a year where you specialize in everything, their rationale being you can't be a good editor unless you know what it is to be a director or a cinematographer. So even if you don't like it, you have to do it. However, I feel like my experience is limited to the grad program, and also all the successful people came out of the grad program. I don't know how I feel about undergrad liberal arts film production programs. Film production programs. Yeah. Film studies. I'm a huge fan. I believe in media literacy quite strongly, so I think any kind of literary course, whether it's film studies or literature classics, whatnot, I think those are very flexible in teaching you how to navigate information. Yeah. And I feel like people who call shit like that useless degrees don't know how degrees work or what degrees do. So I can point to myself as who does directly use their degree in their chosen field of study, but I don't think that necessarily has anything to do with you, anything new, they say. That also said, like I said, everyone in my master's program came out of some form of liberal art, or maybe they were in their 30s and they'd worked for a while, or they came out of journalism. They came out of all walks of life, and that was sort of the intent, and no one had gone for undergrad. I was at TAF for the undergrads for a couple semesters, and the disparity in quality that came out of the grad program and the undergrad program was so vast, and the grads weren't that much older than the undergrads. I think just from what I've seen around, I think undergrad film production programs are. Pradel, I feel what I should have seen Benson have been pro around film I don't want to say they read the worst value, because the worst value would be the for-profit mills. Yes, the full sales in the University of Phoenix. You do need some discretion. There are a lot of mills out there that want actually improve your ability to get in. You do need to look at the school's reputation. So university film production is probably the second worst deal. If you re-looking at grad level, you probably better off doing another undergrad in another topic and then taking that into grad level production. Or if you don't want to go on to grad level, look at a vocational school, because it all cost you a fraction and you will be done in half the time. I think whenever people ask, should I go to film school, if they wanted to go to a vocational school, they would. I think there is a sort of prestige that's attached to it. That said, even schools like New and Usk, again, even for undergrad, the top ones, you not even allowed to touch a camera until you a junior. Yeah, and that's, and that's, and that, and and people get so pissy about you have to go read Dostoevsky and you have to take your math class and your physics requirement. But that's a liberal arts degree. That's part of it. And the problem with film production is it doesn't really mesh with that in a way that, say, an English or any kind of writing, creative writing, film studies would. And I think the undergrads do kind of get the short end of the stick in terms of actual experience. That is the important question. Would you say that you were able to make a living purely off of what you went to school for? With the skills I went to school for, yes. There were some caveats in that would come down to the nitty-gritty of the coursework of, like, I don't think they did quite enough to cover things like the reality of corporate video or freelancing. God, no. Hey guys, if you re-watching this, just a reminder, you need to put in how to charge people as a freelancer into that course material. It's a bit of feedback that no they get every single year. when you go into any film school. It could be the one you went to or Svea us new. There is a certain level of expectation that people have. Not all of it is realistic. And I think that is also the difference between going into film production when you were older, have a little more life experience, because in me grad school experience, the younger ones tended to be a little more big-headed and unrealistic. And they learned their lesson eventually. A little more PE in the sky. You. They learned their lesson eventually. There was definitely, I think you would see this more at a school like us where everyone expects to end up like George Lucas and have, this huge name. If you going to school in Calgary, if you ye going to film school in Calgary, and you not looking to move immediately afterwards, then you probably going to have a little bit more grounded expectation that it's hey, if I'm going into production, I'm probably going to start off as a grip or a lamp bulb. If I'm coming out of the editing stream, it's I'm going to be an assistant editor or a compiler or something like that. I'm going to be audit. I'm not going to be, I'm not going to be odd on a feature. Because that's another thing is people getting big-headed at the top schools. It's again, people be well, I'm going to be a director the second I graduate. Ryan Coogler did. He directed Fruitvale Station. I think he hadn't even graduated yet. And then he directed Creed 2 years later. So, yet, it does happen. So I think tempering kind of that expectation both in terms of what are you going to get out of it? Are you aiming to be technical? Do you just want to work in movies? Or do you want to be a YouTuber? And so if you've got, both good aspirational and realistic expectations that vary wildly depending on where you are and where you're willing to physically move. And that's a huge thing because Ryan Coogler's example could have happened outside of California. No. And also with the right connections, which I believe in his case was Forrest Whitaker. He crossed paths with Forrest Whitaker at the right time, which he would not have done if he had not gone to the school he went to when he did. There's a lot you can do to stack the odds, but there's also still kind of a lot of luck that comes into it. And right place, right time. And if you if you can to be in that right place, if you don't want to stay in a fifth-tier place, if you want to stay in Georgia, if you want to stay in Kansas, if you want to stay in Montana or Utah or Alberta. I don't know if I'd call Georgia a fifth tier, though. I think Georgia's up to, I think Georgia's solidly two. Georgia's solidly at two at this point. They've got all the Marvel movies. Georgia's doing all right. Georgia's doing good. If you in kind of one of the smaller markets, and depending on kind of how small that market is, temper your expectations to it. Do you want to work your way up to bigger and bigger markets? If you in Canada, it's if you in Calgary, are you willing to stick it out long term and keep working on the government grants, keep working on the stuff until you can get, basically break into that small circle of Canadian filmmakers who get money, or are you going to sort of work your way all right, I'm in Calgary, I'm going to move on over to Vail. to new you, hoyo, 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 boo 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 hoyo, 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 boo you boo 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 you, hoyo, hoyo, you boo you boo you boo 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 you, hoyo, hoyo, boo boo, hoyo, you boo boo boo. Ye, expecting to know what you want right out of the gate before you make that kind of decision. It's not going to happen. I think some people do, but probably because they've already got a taste of it, like they got a taste of it in high school. Ye, not the people who are thinking, should I go to film school? Ye. And that is another thing to talk about. Like, whenever you want to talk about what's the big five, it's Busk, New, Afi, the one that doesn't matter, and I think Florida State. Is that right? That's the three, like, who cares? It's true. Well, past the four, I guess. Because you going to want to include uck. No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't, but I mean, I matter do cat at it. We don't say the name of our archenemy. Ye, they re not me archenemy. Okay, so like, if I recently took the crown from you, us as the top film school, and the reason I didn't even bother applying to a FIs if I does assume some, actually not insubstantial amount of experience in your field of choice. You have to apply to a track like directing, cinematography, editing, writing, and you cannot stray out of that track. A FIS program is a lot shorter for that reason. I think it's only a year and a half, and it doesn't really offer you much outside of whatever your specialized vocation is. A lot of the more artistic sorts come from a FI. You read David Lynch, you read Darren Aronofsky, and they want to cultivate your awareness. Yeah, a FI's kind of an up your game sort of destination. Yeah. So, and that obviously only applies to grad. Columbia's grad program, also Columbia doesn't bother having an undergrad program, but their grad program's definitely on the ups and has some, big name alumni like Catherine Bigelow. For that reason, I assume they re more commercial. I don't know. I didn't go there. New is a lot more indie and artistic. You have, from there, alumni like Martin Scorsese, Woody Allen, Spike Lee, Brett Ratner, Michael, oh, Wesley and Michael Bay, Joss Whedon, and one of my new professors actually all went to Wesleyan at the same time, for undergrad, no less. See, undergrad can do you good. Canada would be University of Toronto, McGill, and sait. There's a lot of other, like, decent programs and specialized programs scattered around the post-production industries, but those would be the three big that are either producing working directors, which would be McGill and UFT, or technicians, which would be sait and UFT. Strangely, most of the people in Vancouver just sort of learn on the job. I think that's what most people do. Because whenever people tell you that you don't need a degree or you don't need to go to school in order to work in film, they rewrite. They absolutely right. But here's the thing, it's so much harder. It's like just, I guess the same could apply for engineering or any other thing that requires actual skills and knowledge. It is really difficult to just dive into something and just work your way up from, like a kepa. It's really easy to flame out. Yes. So one of the great things that film school gives you, like even if you go to a vocational school or a technical college for it, is that it gives you a better sense of the whole, so that rather than like, hey, I want to work in movies, and it's like, okay, so you took your set etiquette and protocol course, and now you re-up blocking off roads, and you re going to be doing that for the next 2, 3 years. Because you don't have a better sense of the whole. You re not going to be able to think strategically about your job, which is like, okay, I'm doing roads. I want to get to know the people over in locations. I want to get to know the people over in set. And I either want to become a specialized PO or I want to get into the office. Because even though an office pay is still just a they reworking with the director, they reworking with the first ed, they reworking with the production coordinator, they reworking with the production manager, they re-seeing the producer, they re-getting to know names and faces. If you can't think strategically about it, then you re-going to be allocations pa forever. And you just going to be locking off roads for 3 years until you like, screw this, I'm going to go get a normal job that actually pays the same and doesn't require me to work 16-hour days for 3 weeks in a row. The way you think film sets work, if you've never worked on one or never been taught how they work, you wrong. Holy God, are you wrong? I'm not going to name any names here, but I've been on some sets by people who have never been on a real set that are just a total shit show, and you need to know basic things. How were craft services on those sets? I think it's also really dangerous for the entry-level person to just fall in with a bunch of assets that are going to exploit you and teach you nothing. Oh, there's another dimension to it, is that there are a ton, even still to this day, a metric ton of exploitative shoals out there who are looking for people who want to be in movies, and they will overwork them, underpay them, or not pay them at all, and put them at risk. If you are looking to work on a film set, do not work for free. Don't do it. Even if they re your friends. If they re your best friend, then maybe, but don't work for free. You don't have to work for free. You should be making at least $100 a day as an entry-level person, probably more. Here's some of the biggest things that you going to get from film school that you not necessarily going to have enough of. Because film sets are frickin' dangerous. You have a lot of people moving around. You have a lot of heavy equipment. You have a lot of specialized equipment. You have a heavy people mobile payment. Eco tell well If it anything approaching a big set, then you're talking about really, really high voltages. There are a ton of safety concerns. And when you run into these non-union shoots where it's just some fly-by-night company, and where son very well deal you say someone literally, yeah, that girl in Georgia, that girl in some literal royal yeah, which is exactly where it's going, literally died. This fly-by-night production company's like, hey, we're going to make this movie, and so they got a whole bunch of teenagers and 20-somethings who wanted to be in movies, and they had a couple of trained people, and Sarah was one of them, and she was first cameras. Crew they have the what do what was the do what we live what was you by the view of them while you what was savage well what was you what was Coel File Carfo File be the tree do do the do take a do 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 tree do 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 tree do do W veil Baham do to view do go Barrel 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 do 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 Bow Barrel Barrel do Barrel do to do 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 Bear, bear away, do, bear, do, bear, bear, family, will day, do, do, you do, do, I'll, will, I'll go, I will, well, I will, well. We re going to be maverick filmmakers. We re just going to go rogue and do it anyway, and a woman lost her life. There are other issues to consider, like race and gender issues and discriminations, which we re not going to get into now. That's, I think, maybe a topic for another day. It's difficult to say is it worth it, because it depends on what you want. And it's such a wide spectrum of questions to ask, whether you want to get into a vocational school so you can learn a trade and then just make a living, or if you want to be a big-name film person and go to all with fun film festivals every year or be a professor or something. I think a lot of it really does come down to cost, because whenever I get asked the question, is it worth it? In me case, I kind of go back and forth because it all comes down to that debt. Because if I didn't go into debt, or if I'd even gone into less debt, like even half the debt I'm in now, I would say, yeah, it was totally worth it. But to be $10,000 more in debt now, except for the fact that the school doesn't really offer aid to grad students because it's the top film school, and if you don't want to pay there, There's 200 people in line behind you. Pass you. Pass. Have you do who's to That's part of the real challenge with the big is it's almost like gambling. You are kind of getting potential access to a spotlight career really quickly, but if you're not the lucky one, I mean, even if you are the lucky one, it's a thing. The only exception I know is Ryan Kogler. Even the other people I know that are super doing really well are still in a lot of debt. If you are the one lucky one, then it's still going to take a while to pay that down. It's true of all grad schools. If you reach $60,000, $200,000 in debt, that will just follow you around and it will affect your life decisions. 260 or 80 tell you one important thing. If you pay your minimum payments every year for 25 years, if you have federal loans, they will get forgiven at the end of that period. That is true. On the flip side, I can think of very few downsides to taking the vocational route. Yes, it's not going to you have a much lower chance of being a star, but you can make a living working in movies or working in related fields. It's not the easiest life. It's not the easiest living. There is a lot of uncertainty. But at the same time, it's doable. It's totally doable. The pay-in, particularly for a vocational school, if it's a state school or a federally funded school. or even if you get financial aid, which I hear happens at the school that shall not be named. If it's 2 years and it's only going to cost you $10,000 in tuition, then totally worth it. If you're young and you don't have any debt, $10,000 might seem like a lot. It's amazing the difference between $10,000 and $60,000. I had paid for most of it, so by the time I was done, I was in debt and I got a film-related job right out of school, and I was debt-free by Christmas. I feel like it could be debt-free solely based on me freelance income, YouTube income, and Patreon income. I could be debt-free 2030. 14 years. What is the amount of student debt interest you can write off every year? It is $2,500. I accrue about $4,000. America. I think that's a good place to end. And then I'm going to jump on a plane and go back to the land of socialized medicine and mitigated student debt. I'm very wealthy.